Sugidama blog. Sugidama blog.
Hey everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of Sugidama podcast, the podcast about Japanese sake, the drink so intertwined into Japanese culture that you can see it in every aspect of life in Japan. In cooking, in literature, in anime, in the movies, everywhere. This is the last episode in a mini-series about how to navigate in this vast sake universe. So I've been wondering if you have tried any new sake or experimented with styles, types or temperatures. It would be so cool to know. Please drop me a line, write a comment or leave a review. I really need feedback from you guys. So today we're going to cover something really exciting. Various sake brewing methods. There are three main ones: Kimoto, Yamahai and sokujo or sokujo-moto, and another one, Bodaimoto, which is even older but has been rediscovered only recently. Okay, you may say, why do I need to know about these brewing methods? A simple answer is that sake taste profile depends to a certain extent on the method used to make it. So knowing it will help you to make a better choice of sake. Nowadays, most of sake is made using sokujo-moto method. But we will start with Kimoto, because for centuries, Kimoto was a predominant method for brewing sake. It was the method that developed all the techniques used now. But now not many breweries make sake this way. Only 1% of all sake is Kimoto and another 9% is Yamahai. The rest is sokujo-moto. You can compare Kimoto to handmade things in the past, which took a long time to make. They were a bit rough, but beautiful. Then new technologies were ushered and allowed to make things cheaper, quicker and smoother. We enjoy them, admire them, but still sometimes linger for those old, slightly rough, artisanal stuff. Same with Kimoto. Using this method takes twice as much more time and effort to make sake comparing to sokujo-moto, and requires a technique that is extremely difficult to accomplish in a stable, consistent manner. But a few breweries still make only Kimoto sake. But let's start from the beginning. I'm not going through the basic of sake brewing again, but there are 2 points we have to understand, and I didn't mention them in the previous episodes. I told you that the rice is polished, steamed, infused with koji, and then mixed with water and yeast to start the fermentation process. However, all these steps are done in stages, and to start the fermentation process, you need a starter. If you have ever made sourdough bread, and during the lockdown a lot of people started doing it, you know that you need a starter, pre-fermented dough filled with natural wild yeast and bacteria. This wild yeast is energetic and hungry, and when you mix it with flour and water, it starts multiplying very fast, breaking carbohydrates into the gas carbon dioxide, which expands the dough, forming little bubbles inside. The byproduct of this process, alcohol, evaporates during baking. Same with sake. To start the fermentation, you need a starter, called shubo or moto in Japanese. The reason to make the starter is to increase the amount of yeast, which then will start the main fermentation. It's like preparing an avant-garde of disciples who will then bring your idea into masses. Shubo or moto has a very high concentration of yeast in a relatively small amount of rice. The difference with bread making is that you want to keep this alcohol and usually do not care for carbon dioxide. So what you do? First, you take the polished rice, wash it and soak in water for a while. Just want to mention that Some brewers believe that, and probably not without reason, that soaking is a very important step, which determines the quality of the sake. This is the step at which some toji master brewers use a stopwatch to make it perfect. When the rice is properly soaked, it is steamed, which is another very important step. The rice is steamed, not boiled, because you need to achieve the perfect condition for sake making, soft inside and firm outside, which is opposite to the rice cooking for eating. The soft core will make it easier for koji to propagate inside the rice grains. After steaming, the rice is cooled down and divided into 3 parts. The largest part, around 80% of all rice, will be used for main fermentation. The smaller parts are to make the starter. Are you still with me? It will get easier. About 6-8% of all steamed rice is used for making koji. First, the rice spread over a table in a special koji room and sprinkled with koji pores. Again, the process of making koji is very important. Now a bit of clarification. I was a bit confused with this koji because the word koji is used interchangeably for a few slightly different things. So first we have koji pores, basically koji mold itself. It's also called kojikin in Japanese, but sometimes is referred as just koji. Secondly, we have rice koji, which is also often called koji, and it's basically rice with koji mold growing on it and inside. All the stages are similar in all 3 main sake brewing methods, but after that it starts to differentiate. Basically, the difference between brewing methods is in how the starter is made, because the starter gives the sake its character. But let's leave it for a second. Let's imagine this tank of maromi, sake fermenting mash, where koji and yeast are working hard to make alcohol. This starchy mash is very attractive environment for all kinds of microorganisms. They all feed on carbohydrates and find it delicious. So how can you keep these pesky bacteria, fungi and so on out of your maromi? There is a trick. There's something all of them don't like, but sake yeast does. Acidity. Yes, all these unwanted microorganisms don't like acidic environment. They can't survive. But sake yeast flourish there. So now we know that to make sake, you need a starter and acidic environment. Now let's move to this exciting starter stage. From around 1600s and until the beginning of the 20th century, all sake were Kimoto. So how Kimoto starter was made? The process is called Kimoto jikomi, and at the core of this method lies a technique called Yamahai. So as I have just said, a small amount of steamed rice is infused with koji pores in a special koji room and left for 2 days. Actually, it's not left to itself. Brewery workers are constantly checking temperature, it should be around 35 degrees, spreading the rice to make sure that koji is growing evenly and the rice is not getting too hot, and so on. After 2 days, the koji rice is moved to a cooler place and then mixed with water and the remaining rice left for the starter. And now comes Yamahai, when brewery workers take all like poles and start ramming the mixture for many hours to turn it into some kind of puree. The work was so rough and tedious that the workers made special songs they were singing during the process to keep awake, not to lose count, and just make the work less boring. Mind, Spotify wasn't still available that time, not even FM radio. Let me play you a small bit of the song from Kiku Masamune Brewery's website, which makes a lot of sake using this Kimoto method. Why on earth they were making the rice into puree? For many centuries, rice could be only polished to 90% maximum. As a result, the grains were quite large, and the saccharification process, when koji turns starch into sugar, took too long, which wasn't good, as the starter could be easily spoiled by bad bacteria. When the rice was pureed, the process was quicker. After the starter was ready, it was mixed with the rest of the rice and water to begin the main fermentation. However, in 1909, scientists at Japan's National Institute of Brewing Research discovered that all this hassle with ramming the rice with poles was not actually necessary. Just adjust the temperature, get some patience, and you will get the same result. I'm not sure why sake brewers couldn't discover this themselves for 800 years. Probably other technological advances made it actually possible with consistent results only in the beginning of the 20th century. I don't know. In any case, the new method got rid of this Yama-oroshi stage. So in Japanese, to eliminate sounds like haishi. So to eliminate Yama-oroshi will be Yama-oroshi haishi, which was shortened, as very often in Japan, to Yamahai, Yama-oroshi haishi, or Yamahai jikomi. The second method, very close to Kimoto, but easier. Oh, jikomi or shikomi just means method. But the amazing scientists from the National Institute of Brewing Research didn't stop there. They kept researching and experimenting, and a few years later, they came up with even an easier way of making sake starter, sokujo-moto, which means fast brew or quick fermentation. Remember, I was talking about the acidic environment, which is great for the yeast, but bad for other unwanted microorganisms. When you make starter using Kimoto or Yamahai method, lactic acid bacteria, which live in the air, fall into the tank with the starter and begin to propagate in the nice starchy environment, adding a lot of lactic acid in the process. This lactic acid makes life of the yeast much easier and nicer, keeping away all other uninvited guests. Of course, for centuries, nobody knew about it, what bacteria. However, the smart scientists from the National Institute of Brewing Research discovered this and thought, why should we wait for this lactic acid bacteria to come to the starter if we could just add some specially produced lactic acid? And they were right. After this method was introduced, the brewing process got shortened by 2 weeks and became easier. Nowadays, it has become a default brewing method, so you won't see the word sokujo-moto on the bottle. Another thing to keep in mind, Kimoto and Yamahai methods do not imply that wild yeast is used. As in most cases, the specially selected yeast is added to the starter after the environment good for that. There is a technique called spontaneous fermentation, when the brewer invites the yeast which is floating around into the starter. And in this case, you can only do it if making Kimoto or Yamahai sake, as it takes time for yeast to descend and start working. We will talk about it in another episode dedicated to microorganisms in sake brewing. So far so good? Let's now talk about Bodaimoto, the oldest sake brewing method, discovered by monks at Shorakuji Temple on Mount Bodai, south of Nara. There is an opinion that it was the first proper sake brewed in Japan. The sake was called Bodaisen and had the reputation of the highest quality and grade in medieval Japan. Let's first talk about the method itself. Ironically, Bodaimoto could be considered as a prototype for the modern sokujo-moto. It just took about 700 years to move from to the final product. The main advance in sokujo-moto method was the addition of lactic acid instead of waiting for it to develop naturally, as in Kimoto. Bodaimoto takes a similar approach. It was the first time a starter was separated from the main fermentation. Before that, sake was made like doboroku. Basically, it was doboroku. Again, you can call this point a birth of modern sake. So, now we have learned about 3 points in the sake brewing history which could be considered as births of modern sake. 7th or 8th century, when koji was first used to make sake. 13th or 14th century, when the starter was separated from the main fermentation. And 17th century, when clear sake was first produced, according to good people of Itami, as we learned in the previous episode. So take your pick. Back to Bodaimoto. In this method, sake brewing starts with putting together a bit of steamed rice, around 10%, and the rest of raw polished rice in water. Before mixing, the steamed rice is left to cool down in the air. During this moment, natural lactic acid bacteria, which live in the air, descend on the rice. I'm not going into the technicalities of the process. If you're interested, there is a very good lecture by Oliver from Tengu Sake on their website, where he goes quite deep into the actual process and what happens on the chemical level. I will put the link in the notes. What is important here is that after 3 days, this step produces water rich in lactic acid. This water is called soya-shimizu and used to make the starter. Soya-shimizu is filtered and put aside. The soaked rice is steamed and then cooled down. Then it mixed with the lactic acid, water and koji to make the starter. As the environment is already acidic, only sake yeast which lives in the air, the brewery's walls and so on will survive. It will drop into the mixture and start to propagate, creating the starter. So this is Bodaimoto in a nutshell. Bodaimoto was superseded by Kimoto during the Edo period and went out of use by the beginning of the 20th century, or even earlier. However, the method was rediscovered by Tsuji Brewery, which makes Gozenshu sake, in Akayama in 1994. The story goes as the president of the brewery received an old book of woodblock prints and noticed a recipe of Bodaimoto there. He asked his master brewer, called Toji, remember, to try to make sake using this method. And in 1996, the brewery released its first Bodaimoto sake. However, there is an interesting point about Bodaimoto. This method is not legally defined as, like Kimoto or Yamahai. As I understand, there is a legal requirement to follow the process in order to call sake Kimoto. With Bodaimoto, it's different. When the method was rediscovered, one of the Gazenshu distributors contacted the Shoyakuji temple out of the respect and let them know about the revival of Bodaimoto. The temple decided that it would be a good idea to start making Bodaimoto in the place it was originated hundreds of years ago. So now the temple makes Bodaimoto starter and distributes it among the breweries which would like to make Bodaimoto. The sake they make is called Bodaimoto. However, if a brewery makes its own starter, the convention is that the sake is called Mizumoto. The only exception, as I understand, is Gozenshu, as they continue to call its sake Bodaimoto as a recognition of their role in the method revival. Also, the Bodaimoto method used for Gazenshu sake is slightly modified. I'm not going deep into technicalities here. The main difference between Gozenshu and the original method is that Gazenshu adjusted the process in order to use any yeast they want, while the original method relies on wild yeast. The main reason why breweries prefer to use so-called association sake yeast, which is distributed by Sake and Socho Association, is to have more control and to achieve consistent results. Wild yeast brings too much unpredictability. There is still Toji like Philip Harper from Tamagawa Brewery, who uses spontaneous fermentation, but again, not for all sake he makes. So now let's do a practical part, taste profiles based on a brewing method. A bit of disclaimer. As everything in sake, and honestly, pretty much in Japan, any rule has a lot of exceptions. There are certain characteristics in terms of flavor, taste, acidity of each of the brewing methods. However, taste profile of any sake also depends on a huge number of other factors, mostly ingredients used and brewing techniques. It means that sometimes, and this sometimes could be more often than you think, you can taste a sake, look at the label and get surprised, because it might taste very different from what you would expect. Still, there are common taste profiles for Kimoto, Yamahai and Bodaimoto on which we will focus. So why sake made, say, with Kimoto method will usually taste differently from a sake made with sokujo-moto? The main reason is the longer time for preparing the starter. In the Kimoto method, it takes 2 weeks before yeast is added to develop lactic acid environment. During that time, a lot of microorganisms get into the starter and die there. They bring this wildness and gaminess of the taste in the sake. In general, Kimoto and especially Yamahai are richer, sweeter and more acidic. They have deeper and more umami-laden taste and wilder flavors. But again, some Kimoto and Yamahai, especially in ginja style, are barely different from sake made with sokujo method. Apparently some breweries even avoid putting a word Yamahai on the label, because they don't want their consumers think that the sake is richer than it actually is. Still, in my experience, you usually notice the difference. Bodaimoto and Mizumoto, taste and flavor-wise, are also in the same category as Kimoto and Yamahai. However, they tend to be a bit more acidic due to soya shimizu, a water high in lactic acid, and sweeter at the same time. So, a quick rundown of the things we learned in this episode. There are 3 main sake brewing methods: Kimoto, Yamahai and sokujo-moto, plus Bodaimoto, an ancient method revived in the 1990s. All the methods differ by the way the starter is created. In Kimoto, the starter is churned for hours with special poles to turn it into a mash. Yamahai was invented after the Kimoto and got rid of this churning, but very quickly the sake scientists came up with a modern sake brewing method, sokujo-moto, which slashed the production process by 2 whole weeks and produced clearer and more refined sake. Now sokujo-moto accounts for 90% of all sake made. Bodaimoto is a very ancient sake brewing method invented by Nara monks about 12th-14th century and was superseded by Kimoto. Kimoto, Yamahai and Bodaimoto sake generally has richer and deeper taste, full of nuances. It's usually more acidic and sweeter compared to sake made by sokujo-moto method, but there are a lot of exceptions. And now it's time for the sake of the episode. Today we'll talk about Bodaimoto, but not just Bodaimoto, but a very special one, Gozenshu 1859 prototype, Junmai Morocco Nama Genshu Nakadori Bodaimoto. It's not just Bodaimoto, but has almost all techniques from the sake brewing textbook and is made from a very special rice. As I have mentioned before, Gozenshu is a sake brand of Tsuji Honten, the brewery responsible for the Bodaimoto revival. Tsuji Honten was founded in 1804 and located in Akayama Prefecture, which lies between 2 famous sake regions, Hyogo and Hiroshima. The brewery is famous for a number of reasons. I have mentioned the rediscovery of Bodaimoto. Another notable feature of Tsuji Honten is use of omachi rice, the oldest pure variety of sake rice discovered in the village with the same name in 1859 in the very Akayama Prefecture. The last but not in any way the least cool thing about Tsuji Honten is its toji, Maiko Tsuji, one of the very few female sake master brewers in Japan. Her brother, Soichiro Tsuji, is the Kuramoto, president of the brewery. The story of Gozenshu brand name is quite interesting too. Tsuji Honten originally started as a sake brewery for the local lord. The lord lived in a castle on the mountain behind the brewery and had the sake from the brewery with his meals. I think there is a special name for everything in Japan, and in this case, a lord's meal is called gozen. In the first episode, I mentioned that second reading for character for sake is shu. So put them together and you've got gozenchu, a sake for the lord, so to speak. Now let's talk about the sake itself. So gozenchu is a brand name. 1859 refers to the year when omachi rice was discovered. The sake is the first in the 1859 line, which focuses on bringing the superb quality of omachi rice, thus prototype. I think you can now decipher most of the name. Morocco unfiltered, Nama unpasteurized, and Gensho undiluted. The last bit, nakadori, is quite interesting. Remember, in the previous episode, we were talking about arabashiri sake, which means the first run, rough run. Nakadori means the mid-run, and it's the most prized sake, considered as the finest sake of the batch. So how does Gazenchu 1859 prototype taste? It's a bold and complex sake with a deep and dramatic taste. While it's not an overly aromatic, you will still notice melon and apricot scents and at the beginning. The aroma will unfold slowly as the sake is warming up, adding rice, cheese, and even a bit of stone and wood notes. Gazenchu 1859 prototype's taste is rich and full of wild notes and overtones. It has high acidity, which offsets sweetness of the sake. It's quite potent sake, rich in umami, so it will be perfect companion for rich and spicy food like chili con carne, tacos, Thai curry, or rich and creamy food like risotto. I tried it with cheese and it tasted amazing, and then I drank it with fried teriyaki salmon and it was superb. So that's it for today. I'll be back with more episodes. In the meantime, go and try sake. You might not find Gazenchu 1859 prototype, as I have checked, and Tengu sake is out of stock. But I saw on one of my friends' Instagram from Singapore that they have now Gazenchu 1859 without a word prototype, the proper one. So just keep checking Tengu sake website, it will eventually appear there. While you're waiting, try other Bodaimoto sake. Tengu has a couple of them, or find Kimoto or Yamahai and compare them to any sokujo-moto sake. Should be fun. Go to sugidama.co.uk/tasting-notes and find something which looks attractive to you. Or look in my posts about 5 best seasonal sake. Please send me an email or leave a comment about your experience. If you like the episode and want more, hit the subscribe button. Please, please, please leave a review. Otherwise, other people won't find the podcast. We all are fighting against algorithms now. So the more reviews I have, the more people will have Sugidama podcast in their suggestions from the podcast platforms. And of course, please share this podcast with your friends. Thanks a lot for listening. Kanpai!
Sugidama blog.